Every character in Fire Emblem Awakening has a core identity that is totally unique to them in most cases, and in many cases is not what you would expect. Let's start with Ricken first, because I think he is a great example. He has a very special, very unique identity, and it's not the obvious one. If you look at this kid with his spellbook, oversized wizard hat, his starting class of mage, high base magic, high magic growth, it could be easy to decide that he's just a slow mage. But then you look at his expanded class set. Cavalier and Archer? What is going on here? Well, it's actually pretty clever, and I think probably deliberate on the part of Intelligent Systems. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they did this on purpose. You see, Ricken has access to every single mounted sword-using class in the game. So in a weird, indirect way, Ricken is like the Sword Cavalier of Fire Emblem Awakening. And while starting in the Mage class is a nice little misdirect, he could promote directly into Dark Knight, where he begins to train his sword rank without losing access to his tomes. And eventually he can use the Levin sword. With his high base magic, compared to your other sword users, and not many other 2-range swords available, especially not early on in the game, you could see how Ricken's ability to wield the Levin sword effectively makes him a very novel choice as a sword-focused unit, and allows him to stand out even against the other options. That's really what inspired this video. I want to talk about all of the other features that I found when I was researching the characters, which make all of the shepherds in the game have their own special unit feeling and their own unique builds, despite the fact that you have a wide range of reclassing options. In fact, it's actually because of these reclassing options that you can discover what the identity of each character is supposed to be. If you only looked at their base class, stats, and growths, you could only make surface level assumptions about each unit, but I wanted to examine things on a deeper level. I think Awakening strikes a perfect balance between having a nice, full set of class and reclassing options for every character, but the class sets are still narrow enough that each unit still keeps their own identity, their own features, their own builds, and just something that sets them apart, which only they can call their own. For example, one of my favorites to talk about is Henry, and I've brought this up on stream a few times before, so for those who have watched my streams, you might already know what I'm about to say. Let's look at Henry's class set. Dark Mage is obvious given his backstory, personality, and his design. That's his starting class, after all. But again, we have something weird happening here. Just like with Ricken, he has 2 alternate physical classes, Barbarian and Thief. Now this one I think is really fun. Have you figured it out yet? Henry has access to every class that is most typically associated with enemy units. As a Plegian defector, this makes perfect sense for him. In previous Fire Emblem titles, Dark Mages were mostly used by enemy forces, with a very limited number of dark magic units available to the player, typically as enemy defectors, just like Henry. Barbarians are notorious for destroying villages and being a class that is pretty exclusive to red units for almost all of the other Fire Emblem games. And Thieves, likewise, they can often steal chests, or they could even destroy villages in some other previous titles. Henry is, in every sense of the word, a red unit who has joined the player's side. Although it's a bit funny with that in mind, because Henry actually joins your party as a blue unit at the start of his chapter. Gaius and Tharja are the only 2 who actually start as red units in this game, in the Thief and the Dark Mage class. It's just too bad that this game didn't have a recruitable Barbarian. That would have been a nice touch. Speaking of Tharja, she has a class set that gives her the ability to enemy phase sweep on every difficulty of the game. Combining that with her relatively high speed and defense score, and you can see how she was designed to work as an enemy phase tank. Dark Mage is the tankiest of the magic using lines, with access to Nosferatu for enemy phase recovery. This strategy is viable on every difficulty, although it really shines on Lunatic and Hard. The Knight class gives her access to both General and Great Knight, and these classes have the raw stats and the power to juggernaut their way through normal and even hard difficulty without too much trouble. Honestly, I even think that there's value in having a pretty fast, tanky General, even on the higher difficulty modes, but it can be a little bit more niche and it's a little bit more trickier to use her in that way. But Archer is a surprisingly bulky class line, and most importantly, this is the one that actually really shines on Lunatic Plus. When you equip a bow, it becomes impossible to deal counter damage to yourself. This allows her to sweep through groups of enemies, because they're always going to prefer to attack at 2 range whenever possible. She can consistently damage the 2-range enemies while just refusing to attack anything at 1 range that might cause her to otherwise counter-damage herself. If you've never played Lunatic Plus, this might seem like a slow and ineffective strategy, but trust me, having even just 1 or 2 strong units who can ignore counter is quite powerful, and the way it works is more intuitive than you might expect, because as soon as one enemy has moved in front of Tharja and blocked her, all of the remaining enemies can only attack her at 2 range, and she can counter them with her bow. This is probably the ideal class set that I would give to a character if I wanted them to have the ability to tank on every difficulty mode, and it's really cool that she actually has all of these features to shine in any playthrough. Speaking of shining, let's take a look at Chrom, who really shines in the support role. He is probably one of the most unique and one of my personal favorite lords in the history of the series, because of his ability to play differently from all previous lords and all those who have come after. With natural access to Dual Strike Plus, Chrom really embodies the philosophy of Fire Emblem Awakening. Both in story and in gameplay, this game emphasizes the idea that we can overcome otherwise impossible odds and impossible battles by joining together and relying on our bonds that we formed with our allies. Even though we know that the future has already been destroyed, we can still change fate using these bonds and create a better future for ourselves. Even if an enemy has stats that are impossible for Chrom to fight safely, Frederick could pair up with him and give him the power to fight that enemy. Or Chrom can give Frederick the speed that he needs to double an enemy and clear out a group of foes with more consistency. It's probably no coincidence that Great Lord, Paladin, Great Knight, Sniper, and Bow Knight are all fantastic support classes. The designers of this game really knew what they were doing, and they had a specific idea in mind when they created Chrom, and in my opinion, they succeeded at making one of the best lords of all time. After a couple of weird, surprising, and strange characters, let's talk about a very straightforward one. Miriel has access to every single promoted magic class in the game, thanks to her base class set being forged from just the right combination of tier 1 classes. You'd be surprised at how many of the other magic characters, even with redundancy, end up missing at least one of these promoted classes. This one is exactly what you would expect. Miriel is, from top to bottom, the mage of this game. Let's look at Lissa and Maribelle for comparison's sake, to see what I'm talking about. Because both of them lack Dark Mage access, neither one of them can ever get access to the Sorcerer class. They are built as more staff-using characters rather than mages in general, like Miriel is, and while their class sets do look similar at a glance, there are a few differences. Both of them have Pegasus, which gives them access to Falcon Knight, a top-tier staff-using class, which combines flight and high movement with staff utility. Both of them can become Sage, Valkyrie, and War Cleric, which makes sense, but they have different base classes, and that's probably the only thing that sets them apart. Lissa has Cleric and Troubadour, while starting in Cleric. Maribelle has Troubadour and Mage, while starting in Troubadour. It's interesting that both characters actually can promote directly to War Cleric, because this class has very good physical combat stats combined with good resistance, staff utility, and most notably it actually doesn't have any weaknesses against any effective weapons in the game. We're going to talk more about that later. But because Lissa and Maribelle are both more magically focused, it basically means that both of them can eventually become a Sage or a Valkyrie. Maribelle is the only one who can promote directly into Valkyrie, and in fact she's the only character in the game who can do this without a second seal, but on the other hand she can never promote directly into Sage, which is what Lissa and most of the other characters can do. I wasn't 100% sure what to make of this, but it also might have something to do with Maribelle being such a high-class, high-quality lady that she'd have access to a more exclusive promotion line, while the commoners are more stuck with the Sage class without a horse. Although Lissa isn't really a commoner, so I'm not sure. These two characters have by far the most overlap of any characters in the game, aside from maybe one or two other special cases, which I guess we can discuss now while we're here. Let's talk about Vaike and the other overlapping infantry character sets. In my recent video, I mentioned that Vaike is just a genetic freak with amazing bases and growths in all physical stats. It would be easy to call it a day there, and just say he's a strong physical infantry character, and this is true. But still, in this video I want to take a deeper look. So I thought, well, maybe since it's Vaike, he might have access to every axe-using class, but even that's not true, because he can't get into General, because he doesn't have access to Knight. In fact, his class set is Barbarian, Fighter, and Thief does seem like the odd choice out here. It is still true that all of his class options are footlocked, and he can't ever use a Lance, which is an interesting little quirk, but I was hoping for something a little bit more definitive compared to this. All I can say is that he is never vulnerable to any effective weapons, no matter what class you put him in. All of his classes have solid combat bases, with either axe or sword focus, and secondary access to either bows or staves. If I want to give credit to his design and say there is one unifying element here, it's probably that all of Vaike's class options are a little bit rough around the edges, just like he is. Even Trickster feels like the one staff-using class with the least access to traditional magic education. On that note, let's talk about Gaius, who has almost the exact same class set. In this case, we get Thief, Fighter, and Myrmidon. By replacing Barbarian with Myrmidon, we end up with a very similar looking character, but we give up specifically Berserker for Swordmaster. The intent here again seems to be that this low-class thief wouldn't have access to things like nice armor, a mount, or formal magical training. He's stuck with this basic infantry class set, but it more closely matches his skilled and cunning personality as opposed to Vaike's Berserker persona. Still, compared to Maribelle and Lissa, who have all of the exact same promoted classes, we have to give credit for the fact that Berserker and Swordmaster are like the polar opposite. Moving on from Gaius, the next logical place to look would be Lon'qu, because at a first glance you might think that he's very similar to Gaius, but unlike with some of the previous discussions, the one small difference in their class set really sets them apart here, and it's for multiple reasons. Lon'qu's starting class is probably the biggest hint. So Lon'qu starts in Myrmidon, with the ability to reclass into Thief or Wyvern later on. Because of the overlap between Myrmidon and Thief, the difference between Fighter and Wyvern access is the more compounded difference. It means that unlike Vaike and Gaius only having one unique class each, Gaius and Lon'qu have two divergent class sets. Fighter can promote into Hero and Warrior, which Lon'qu can't get into, but Lon'qu's Wyvern gives him access to both Wyvern Lord and Griffin Rider, and both of these are inaccessible to Gaius. Anyway, long story short, that one small difference between Fighter and Wyvern actually makes a big difference between the characters. You see, for Lon'qu, who starts in Myrmidon with Evade plus 10, it becomes more easy to draw a connection between his full class set and come to a more definitive conclusion than I did with either Vaike or Gaius. I struggled a bit with those due to their generic infantry sets, but Lon'qu feels a lot more deliberate. Thief, Myrmidon, and Wyvern gives him access to almost every single one of the top tier evasion boosting skills in the game, and this shouldn't surprise you. He is a dodgy Myrmidon. You'd expect him to be good at dodging, but the fact that they went out of their way to tailor his expanded class set to this identity is really cool. Evade plus 10, which Lon'qu starts with, is like combining Indoor Fighter and Outdoor Fighter into a single skill slot. Quick Burn is just a better version of Slow Burn, and it also combines well with Lucky 7, which Lon'qu also has. He also gets 2 Breaker skills, with Lance Breaker and Sword Breaker both being solid options. Because of the high accuracy of lances and swords, that extra 50 evade can help push enemies down to a 0% hit rate. Honestly, the weakest evade skill in his kit is probably Tantivy, and even that at least is clearly meant to be the defensive evasion equivalent to Focus. Which, by the way, if you have a para partner, you do still get the benefits of Tantivy and Focus. It only deactivates if there's an ally standing somewhere on the field within 3 tiles. So yeah, this is a really cool one for me. I love how deliberately Lon'qu was given classes that function with the skill system of Awakening to reclass him to be even more of an invasion monster than he is at base. Speaking of this, Frederick surprisingly has one of the most similar identities to Lon'qu, if you can believe it. While Lon'qu is all about evasion, Frederick is more of a traditional tank who combines conventional defense with an extra layer of evasion to become even more unkillable. You might even notice this early on in your playthroughs, even when playing on Lunatic and Lunatic Plus, that enemies have surprisingly shaky hit rates against this heavily armored tank, and they tend to miss him a lot. The power of Outdoor Fighter and a little bit of inflated stats is usually enough to make it tough for enemies to hit him, and they just end up missing him enough over and over again. This significantly cuts down on the amount of damage that Frederick is going to take while he's tanking through the first 7 or 8 chapters of the game, but the story goes even further than this. So first of all, keep in mind that Great Knight has total weapon triangle control, and this means that against sword, axe, and lance-wielding enemies, Frederick can always maintain weapon triangle advantage, and deny the enemies from getting the A-rank weapon bonuses that they're always going to have on Lunatic mode and above. If you want to grab Indoor Fighter as well, he can go into Knight, although I wouldn't recommend doing that. But what I would recommend is that just like Lon'qu, Frederick can use his Wyvern access to pick up Quick Burn as well as several Breaker skills from the advanced Wyvern class lines. That extra 15 points of evasion is going to make it so that enemies are dealing even less damage to Frederick over time, but just remember that when building an enemy phase sweeper, whether you want to use a Nosferatu tank, a soul tank, a dodge tank like Lon'qu, or a more conventional tank like Frederick, every attack that you dodge will deal 0 damage, and that is a massive decrease that you have to keep in mind. It's not just about avoiding lethal damage one time by getting lucky. Instead, you have to think about the next 30 enemies that Frederick is going to fight. If you can turn 10 damage into 0 damage 10 times, Frederick has effectively taken 100 less damage. I think the devs must have understood this when they gave Frederick a class set that, just like Lon'qu, is designed to add a strong evasion kit on top of his natural tankiness, and in my opinion, they are among the 2 best conventional dodge tanks in the game. Now, having said all of this and gotten this far into the video, we do of course need to talk about Robin. Robin's existence throws a bit of an unfortunate wrench into my whole theory. After all, Robin can access every class in the game, right? Doesn't that mean that any character who has a unique identity, Robin can just copy their identity with access to an even wider class pool and do it better? And I don't deny that on some level this is true. It's actually symptomatic of a problem that we're not really going to see very clearly until later on in Fates, and especially in 3 Houses. When characters can reclass into every possible class in the game, unit identity starts to become a bit more blurry. But in defense of the Awakening development team, well, I have 3 points that I really want to make. So first of all, experience gain is a problem. Veteran might offset this slightly, but realistically you're not going to be able to reclass Robin through like 5 or 6 full class lines and have them, still be able to continue gaining levels. Secondly, Robin is the only character who is able to do this, and that's very different from having every character in the game able to do this. It still means that Robin has the unique identity of being the one who can reclass. Third, this is the first game where they actually tried this reclassing and skill-focused system, so of course there's always going to be things that you can only learn from trial and error, and even with that in mind, I think they did a good job. In spite of all of this, I actually believe that Robin does have their own unique identity, and it's only shared with one other character, Morgan, but Robin and Morgan will never have the exact same identity, because it actually relates to Robin's gender, which is always the opposite of Morgan. First, let's start by looking at the Tactician class. What does this give us? Well, eventually you do get Rally Spectrum, so you could say that Robin is a really good rally character, but this only looks at their base class, it only looks at the surface level, and it's not even exactly true, for several reasons. Robin is such a versatile combat unit, relegating them into a rally build is wasting their full potential. And most importantly, rally skills are the best in this game when you can inherit one or more of them. This cuts down on the experience problem, it cuts down on the amount of levels and the amount of grinding that you need to do through multiple class lines just to get these rally skills. Most notably, Morgan is the only character in Awakening who can learn every single rally on a single build, because of their ability to inherit gender-specific rallies from Robin. But still, this isn't Robin's identity, that's Morgan's identity. There is one other special thing about Tactician, the ability to wield tomes and swords at base. Tomes allow Robin to defeat enemies with high defense, swords allow Robin to defeat enemies with high resistance. On Lunatic Plus, Robin is your only character at the start of the game who can play around either Aegis or Pavis. The only other way to do this is by promoting your other characters into classes that have access to both lines, and there isn't any other base class in the game that has split weapon type access, and Robin's ability to wield magic and physical weapons makes them invaluable in the early game Lunatic Plus. It's one of the reasons why they tend to get so much experience and tend to grow very quickly. Even the other characters in the game, in the text, in the script, in the story, they're all taking note of how unusual it is that Robin can use both swords and magic. They're trying to highlight Robin's unique identity for you, and it goes even further than this. Remember when I mentioned Robin's gender? Robin can access every class in the game. This is true, but remember there are gender-locked classes, so they can't actually access every class in the game, depending on their gender. But let's take a look at the promoted class options, and especially the gender-specific classes. Keeping in mind that Grandmaster is exclusive to Robin and Morgan, with this ability to play around Aegis and Pavis, next we're going to look at their gender-locked options. These are determined when you pick Robin's gender, so you get to choose, but no matter what you choose, the same thing happens. Barbarian and Fighter give access to Warrior, which can play around Aegis and Pavis by combining axes and bows. Pegasus Knight allows you to promote into Dark Flyer, which can play around Aegis and Pavis by utilizing spears and tomes. the gender-exclusive class lines all have the same property as Robin innately does. This character whose gender you're allowed to control, they all have split weapon type access, and this is otherwise rare outside of a few other classes, Assassin and Dark Knight. So in the end, they probably didn't realize just how much of a problem it would be for Robin to have access to the full class set of either gender. I do think it might have been a deliberate choice that Robin's identity will always largely be focused around them having access to a few exclusive classes, all with a combination of physical melee weapons with either bow access or tome access to play around Aegis and Pavis at the highest level of difficulty. Robin is meant to be extremely versatile, not just by having access to every class, but by having a versatile range of options within the classes that they're most likely to use. And who knows, maybe I'm overthinking things, but I personally feel that I came to this conclusion just by thinking about the information that was in front of me. I didn't go out of my way, I wasn't trying to force myself to come up with something just, to make the script sound good. I actually thought that this logic made a lot of sense. But what do you think? Either way, I want to move on here because we still have a few more characters to talk about. Sully and Stahl are the Cavaliers of this game, and they do have a bit of overlap, but their one difference makes them into almost entirely different characters. In previous games, the pair of early Cavaliers typically have a very small difference of just one favored weapon type over the other, and that's also true here, but the difference is extremely small. It's even more minor than in most past games. It's not even a full weapon rank, just a partial amount of weapon experience, and in this game with the discipline skill, they're both going to rank up very fast in whichever weapon you end up giving to them. Both characters have Cavalier and Myrmidon, which means you could actually put Astra and Luna onto both characters, increasing your offensive potential by having a chance to crit, a chance to dual strike, a chance to proc Astra, a chance to proc Luna, multiple times per combat, every time you attack. That can be a really nice feature, but it's really the final class of each of these characters which is going to set them apart, especially because there is no overlap with their unique classes. Stahl can become an archer, which gives him access to Sniper and Bow Knight. With Sniper and Archer, he is the only Generation 1 character who can combine Astra and Luna with a longbow. This is a fun, unique little niche that sets him apart from everyone else in the game, although to be honest, it probably requires too much grinding to actually be worth it, especially in a no-grinding context. On the other hand, Sully does lack Archer. She could technically still use the Assassin to do this anyway, but just without longbow access. More importantly, her exclusive class is Wyvern, and this makes her more similar to Lon'qu and Frederick. In fact, she's almost like a combination of the two. With Myrmidon, Cavalier, and Wyvern access, she's a character with more balanced stats in between Lon'qu and Frederick. She can be tanky and evasive, bringing the best of both worlds, but she does require a little bit more effort to train compared to Lon'qu and Frederick. Most notably, Sully brings a set of well-rounded and very high stats across the board into the already fantastic Wyvern class line with other good strong combat bases, gives her the ability to fly, and she can really shine even on the highest difficulty. The Wyvern Lord is special because it's one of the few classes in the game that can hold a beast killer but isn't vulnerable to enemy beast killers. If you're able to get Sully into Wyvern Lord before Chapter 12 and train her a little bit, she can make the extremely difficult chapter feel significantly less threatening because of her ability to fight against the paladins in this chapter. The other candidate for this role is Panne. She has a lot of overlap with Sully, but again, the small difference in their class set actually leads to a really big change in identity. Most notably, when it comes to weapon ranks, Panne always loses out. She starts in the Tagwell class, which is not only going to make her overall class set more narrow, but she basically only has 2 promoted class lines, Myrmidon and Wyvern, but this comes with several other problems. When you get to level 10, you have to reset to level 1 in one of these other base classes, but your Beaststone Mastery doesn't carry over, so you end up getting stuck with an E-rank weapon. Also, without the Beaststone, which normally boosts your stats, she's going to feel significantly weaker in combat. Worst of all, without the benefit of discipline that Sully has, it takes Panne a lot longer to raise her weapon rank to a useful level, but actually it gets even worse than this. Despite the fact that Panne unquestionably has better stats than Sully, she's basically just a better version of Sully if you look at the numbers, the truth is a lot more nuanced. Being a Tagwell, Panne always has weaknesses to beast killers, even if you change her into a different class line. This means that one of the few special things about Wyvern Lord, the fact that it's not weak to beast killers, doesn't apply to Panne. She's still going to be weak to them anyway, and this makes her significantly harder to use in Chapter 12 because the paladins are still threatening her with lethal damage, and it also takes significantly more work to get Panne herself to the level where she can even hold the Beast Killer effectively, unlike Sully, who joins early and will most likely already have C rank lances before Chapter 5 if you're training her. This difference between the two is most prominent on Lunatic Plus, where you're really going to feel it. On lower difficulties, it can be easier to just see Panne's higher stats and make very good use of her without as much thought. Having said all of that, I still don't want to take away from Panne or her unique identity. Her amazingly high growth rates and bases make it possible to turn her into a pure statistical monster, even with the beast weakness, and effective weapons aren't really that common outside of the Chapter 12 roadblock anyway. On top of that, the Tagwell class line is a good pair-up option, giving both speed and strength, which is appreciated by several characters. There is also a special quality of the Tagwell, where if you level them all the way up to level 30, you can actually use a second seal to immediately switch them over to a promoted class. So in theory, you could raise Panne all the way up to level 30 pretty fast, taking advantage of accelerated experience because she always counts as a base class while she's in Tagwell, and with her high growth rates, before eventually switching her directly into a promoted class. There's no need to grind through Myrmidon or Wyvern Rider unless you wanted to get one of the skills from those classes, or if you needed an extra flyer early on. Nowi shares many of the same qualities with Panne, so I'm not going to repeat the same thing over and over again. She has even more absurd growth rates, with the highest total in the game by far. I think Manakete is even easier to train up to level 30 because it can attack at 1-2 range, and then with her inflated stats, you can make her into either a Sage or a Wyvern Lord, whatever you prefer. But she has the same downsides as well. If you do switch Nowi at level 10, like say into a Wyvern Rider, she's going to struggle a bit in the short term. With only E rank axes and fairly underwhelming combat, it's going to be hard to train her back up. But I will say, from personal experience, once she has been trained, a Wyvern Lord Nowi can become a terrifying force on the battlefield. Although this is basically true of every character in the game, so we really have to set our personal experiences and our personal biases aside. If you put that amount of effort into training anyone, they will eventually get good. In theory, I think Mage might even work a little bit better, because it should be easier to train with a 1-2 range tome, so keep that in mind if you do want to use Nowi. I do want to make a note here that Wyvern gets access to Strength +2, and Mage gets access to Magic +2, so there is something to be said of the fact that both of Nowi's base class options have damage stacking skills. This might be significant somehow. Just remember when you are training her that Nowi keeps weakness to dragon slaying weapons for the entire game, but these are extremely rare, so it's much less of a concern than the beast weakness. Plus, she can learn Swordbreaker and Quick Burn to reduce the hit chance of those weapons eventually. Virion's class set of Archer, Wyvern, and Mage gives him a similar quirk to Nowi, where he has both Strength +2 and Magic +2 for damage stacking purposes, but unlike Nowi, he has very underwhelming bases and growths. To be honest, I think bows shine on the highest difficulty mode in this game, and Virion is one of the few characters with fast, easy bow access at 0 resource cost. Arguably, he's the only character who can do it with 0 resource cost, but even with that in mind, he is typically going to feel a little bit weak. I could just be making assumptions here, but I think if I had to guess, it feels to me like the devs knew that Virion was a weak character, but they might have intended him to be a character who passes down one of these damage stacking skills to his child. And I've talked about doing this in some of my previous character guide and character build videos, where I give more detailed breakdowns and assessments of just one specific character, but the idea works like this. You get Virion an S-rank support partner without focusing too much on leveling or training him. As long as he can reach level 10 while supporting his partner, which isn't too difficult to achieve, this is all you need him to do. Later on in the game, when you're getting ready to paralog chain and recruit Generation 2 units, you're also going to have access to infinitely viable second seals. At this time, you can change Virion over to either a Wyvern or a Mage class. Even though he's going to continue to sit on the bench, changing his class causes him to immediately learn Strength +2 or Magic +2. He can pass this skill down to his child, giving them the equivalent of a tonic that is just always active and for free for every battle in the game, and you can still use a tonic in addition to this bonus. And it can be used to break the stat caps when you get to the end game. There are a few skills that are handy to pass down in this method, especially if you can do it by using a mediocre Generation 1 character, like Virion, to give a valuable skill to a better Generation 2 unit. So I think the devs probably understood that this was going to be possible, and they might have even considered that this reclassing and inheritance skill meta was going to be a thing. Lock Touch works the same way. You really don't want to grind for 10 levels in Thief just to get access to Lock Touch, but if you can inherit it for free, it's pretty nice to have. The idea is just so esoteric that I've rarely ever seen anyone talking about it. Most people who were at the forefront of Awakening strategy discussions would just prefer to brute force their way through the game with a single Juggernaut, and they never really bothered with the class or the skill system to this level of depth, especially with Generation 2 Inheritance. But anyway, with Virion having both of the damage stacking Inheritance skills in his class set, it made me think that his unit identity might have been related to this. Moving away from Generation 2 and Inheritance, a concept that could be tricky to route into a no-grinding playthrough, let's talk about Cherche. She is a character who absolutely shines in LTC, challenge runs, any type of no-grinding run that you can think of. Complete opposite of what we were talking about before. She joins the game a bit later on, but she's already leveled and she starts in a solid class line while having the option to go directly into Wyvern Lord or Griffin as you prefer, or she's even in a state where you could still second seal her over if you wanted to. She has a lot of immediate power and a lot of versatility for how you want to use her to solve the unique challenges for whatever kind of run that you're planning. And her class set, bizarrely enough, actually reflects this concept perfectly. You might think that because she starts as a Wyvern Rider, she's meant to be a physical combat unit, but this isn't necessarily true. Cherche is actually more of a utility unit. She has flight, she has access to Griffin, she has good enough combat to perform out of the box without needing a training arc, but she can be useful to slot into any party. That's her true potential. It runs so much deeper than this. I've talked about this before in my team building video about the power of staffs in this game, and how even having just one extra staff character who is capable of holding a staff can make them extremely valuable. Well, again, look no further than Cherche. Cleric and Troubadour seem like a strange option for her, but they give her a special niche that, again, it just works perfectly for players who need that one extra character who can perform an essential function in a challenge run. At this point in the game, you might be looking for one additional staff user. Being able to send her over to Valkyrie for high movement with staff access, War Cleric to keep her good combat along with staff access, gives her the versatility which is really at its core the unit identity of Cherche. She's not meant to be a Wyvern exclusively, instead she's meant to be a late joining, extremely versatile utility character who can be adapted to the needs of any challenge. Donnel is quite the opposite of Cherche in every imaginable way. She joins late, pre-trained, and can immediately make your playthrough and your life easier with a range of highly flexible options. Staff access doesn't really care that much about weapon rank, so even if you want to do a reclassing arc for her, it doesn't slow her down at all. Donnel is just unfortunate in that regard. He does join early, but he requires a torturous amount of training. No matter how much you invest into him, no matter how cleverly you try to do it, as soon as you reclass him, he immediately hits that wall and resets into an E-rank weapon, and he has to be babied, and he has to be trained all over again. He doesn't make your life easier, he makes your life harder, and if there's any reward for using this poor kid, it's not going to come until much, much later. I'm not going to do a full analysis of why I think Donnel is so overrated and honestly quite a bad unit, because it's going to be better to keep this video on topic and save that discussion for its own video, which is coming eventually for sure. But I can at least tell you this right now. The Villager class has the same problems as Taguel and Manakee, with none of the upsides. His overall class set is very narrow because Villager doesn't promote. Unlike Taguel and Manakee, he doesn't have a stone that boosts his stats, so training him to level 30 in Villager is an absurd, comical notion. To make matters worse, his already limited class set has overlap, which means he has even fewer classes. He has the fewest available promoted classes of any character in the game. Donnel has almost no versatility in what he can do, but even the one thing that he can do, he's not the best at it. He's arguably the worst. With only Mercenary and Fighter access, Donnel essentially just has a choice of which of the two soul-tanking builds he wants to run. You can get Arms Thrift by going through Mercenary, or you can get HP plus 5 and start leveling up your axe rank sooner by going through Fighter. Technically, he can run Bow Knight or Warrior as well, which are both nice classes, especially because of bow access, but either way, it's pretty obvious what his identity is meant to be. he is a dumpster tier trainee unit that, if you really want to invest the effort into using him, is going to make you feel good about yourself later on for all of the effort that you put in. I think it's worth emphasizing that out of every possible early soul tank, Donnel takes the most amount of time, the most amount of experience, and the most amount of effort to get into soul. And once you train him to get soul, he has the fewest options for reclassing into any other soul tanking class outside of hero. But really, let's just save all that for its own video. For now, let's talk about one of the other soul tanking options, Gregor. I could have talked about him earlier along with Vaike and Gaius, but he is different and special enough that I wanted to give him his own section. He really embodies the concept of an older, wiser version of those two characters, with a similar but much better class selection. Gregor avoids having any overlap in his tier 2 class sets, and this gives him a very wide range of promoted classes to choose from, and it gets even more interesting when we examine those classes more closely. Mercenary gives access to Hero and Bow Knight. Barbarian gives access to Berserker and Warrior. Myrmidon gives access to Swordmaster and Assassin. So first of all, I really want to again draw attention to the fact that he has 6 promoted classes to choose from. That's something that a lot of other characters lack due to the way class redundancy works. But more importantly, given to his wise and more experienced nature, he has so many solid options for classes with split bow and melee access, and that's so valuable to have. Warrior, Bow Knight, and Assassin all give Gregor the ability to play around both Aegis and Pavis if you're playing on Lunatic Plus, as well as avoiding counter damage by equipping himself with a bow and turning off his own ability to fight back against one-range attackers. Most notably, going into the hero class is going to allow you to train either your sword rank or your axe rank, depending on what you prefer Gregor to have, before reclassing him into a different class that has bows. Or you can go directly into Bow Knight to begin training your bows right away. He shares the same quality that Cherche has that I talked about previously, where his relatively late join time is offset by the fact that he comes pre-trained and highly versatile. You can slot him into your team or your route depending on exactly what you need. The only bad thing I can say about Gregor is that statistically he's a slightly worse version of Vaike in the long term, but given how strong Vaike is, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that a trained Vaike will outshine Gregor, but Gregor has the ability to join and perform right away if you didn't train Vaike. This makes him shine more on things like LTC, 0% growth, and other challenge runs, just like Cherche does. Libra is another character who is highly impressive from the moment he joins, but I will say, unlike Gregor or anyone else, there is no equivalent to this guy. There are no men like Libra, there is only Libra. He is an absolute monster who has good enough combat right away, but more importantly, long-lasting utility that will never stop being valuable. In terms of class identity, he is built like a male version of Miriel. He has access to all of the tier 2 magical classes, except for the gender lock class in Valkyrie, but he makes a significantly stronger War Monk option than any of your other staff users, and he also joins in this class, which really draws attention to that fact. To be honest, if you just use him as a free staff-using unit with a 10-range rescue that never needs to be trained, and he isn't afraid of getting attacked by enemies, he's already one of the best characters in the game, just by performing that role. So maybe they didn't even really put too much thought into what his identity should be outside of this determination. But still, having said that, his ability to kind of go into any staff-using class while also having whichever offensive potential that he wants gives him a wide range of versatility, and it just seems like the Awakening late joining characters, especially the pre-promotes, are really built to do this. I'm not going to talk at length about Anna, because she has many of the same qualities as Libra. I could almost repeat word for word everything that I just said, while only switching out a few proper nouns, but I will say that Libra's ability to support with your main female army gives him an edge, for me personally, but Anna does compensate this by having impossibly high stats for her level. She's definitely mechanically, numerically stronger. Either way, both of them very strong, very cool, and I usually just end up talking about how amazing they are in almost every team building and guide video that I make for Awakening. So you guys are probably tired of hearing it at this point. As for Kellam, how many of you were wondering if I would intentionally leave him out of this video as a joke? Well, too bad. He actually has a very fun unit identity, so he isn't one of the ones that I intentionally wanted to save for last. Save the best for last or something like that, I guess. Like Ricken and Henry, who we talked about at the start, Kellam has a weird class set on the surface. I mean, Knight, Priest, and Thief, what do these classes even have in common? But in defense of Kellam, it's not like there's very many classes that have direct overlap with Knight. It's a class with a pretty firm identity compared to most of the others. Anyway, what I do like about this class set is that it allows Kellam, who initially serves as a combat filler, a decent tank, or a pair-up unit for others, to eventually transition into more of a utility role. So he goes from being a support utility to a support utility. But unlike many of the other utility characters, Kellam brings a lot of defense and bulk into those other roles. You can make him into a bulky staff user, a bulky lock touch unit, or even a bulky staff using lock touch unit. I do think Staff Kellam is probably one of the most slept on applications of his abilities. With the power of War Cleric's high base stats, you are essentially shedding Kellam's heavy armor weakness, and in exchange, you're getting amazing versatility and power from staff access. On top of that, you can train his axe rank in general before sending him over here. And on top of all that, Kellam might be one of the best beneficiaries of the renewal skill out of the entire Generation 1 roster. You know who really appreciates getting a free 30% heal every turn? A strong enemy phase sweeper with high defense, no weakness to any effective weapons. With the chip damage he takes, this 30% heal will likely be enough to bring him back to full health almost every turn. And one really fun thing about this build is that you can have him use a staff every turn instead of attacking, while still tanking his way through enemies. And if you want to get extremely clever, you could even intentionally leave him without a weapon equipped. If you do this on Lunatic Plus, it gives you a very bulky staff user who can stay near the front of the army, heals himself back up every turn, and keeps using his staff on nearby allies while drawing aggro, and yet he never hits himself with counter damage. It's kinda hilarious, but Staff Kellam is not just a meme. Lastly, I want to talk about the Pegasus Riders and what sets them apart, because believe it or not, they are actually far more distinct than some of the other entries on this list, especially all those characters with overlapping infantry access that we had to go through earlier. Sumia has better speed, while Cordelia's stats are more balanced, with a bit more strength and bulk, and this is going to be relevant. But first, let's talk about Sumia. She's another one of those characters who has a weird looking class set, but is really genius once you start to understand it. Pegasus, Knight, and Cleric. Well, the overlapping staff access between Falcon and Cleric line makes sense at least, but what gives here? Pegasus is a very fast line and Sumia is very fast. The other classes are slow, but that's the design. Have you ever wanted a super fast general? Sumia can take her speed into the general class, and she can do that. Her speed base and growth is high enough to make this work. Do you want a fast and deadly Sage or Valkyrie? Do you want a great Knight who's going to be faster than Frederick? Sumia can do all of those things. Her class set is effectively designed around the value of high speed, but it allows her to utilize this advantage and turn it into a faster version of some of the other classes that otherwise struggle in the speed department. I don't know if it works that well in theory, because Falcon Knight is such a fantastic class already, it's very difficult to justify sending her anywhere else, but at least in concept, I think this is what they were going for. And finally, this brings us to Cordelia. She's a bit of a mirror to Sumia, a reflection but opposite. With Pegasus, Mercenary, and Dark Mage, this means that Cordelia has the strengths of the default Pegasus, that very high speed, while also having reclass options into both of the best enemy phase sweeper builds. You can make her into a soul tanking hero, a sorcerer with Nosferatu, or you could even train her to learn Soul before going into Sorcerer for extra healing on top of Nosferatu access. I think she struggles a bit as a Dark Mage because of her horrible magic base and growth, but again, like with Sumia, it seems the idea was at least there. With her more balanced defensive stats and better bulk, it looks like the intention was to make Cordelia into a character who can reclass into an enemy face sweeper, as opposed to Sumia, who is better as a speed control character. We do run into the same problem again, where Falcon Knight is such a great class, you might not even want to send Cordelia anywhere else. However, I can at least say that Hero Cordelia with Soul is appealing enough, and it is viable enough that is worth considering. But I do think that Severa does this same build even better, just because of the way skill inheritance and starting classes on Generation 2 characters interact. The fact that you can plan for exactly what Severa looks like when she joins is a discussion that goes beyond the scope of this video. Does anyone want me to talk about the Generation 2 units in the future? I would probably need to frame that video in a slightly different way because, after all, the unit identity of the Generation 2 characters is a lot less clear because they have the ability to inherit almost any class in the game. But I am very interested in talking about my thoughts on the Generation 2 units and how they could be made viable even in a no-grinding context, so let me know your thoughts if you want to see that video, and subscribe to the channel or leave a like if you liked this video. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day.